the District of Columbia. And many months ago, the District of Columbia grand jury, sure enough, returned a 2-count indictment against Steve Bannon, a 2-count indictment alleging his contemptuous behavior and charging him with offense conduct, each one of which carries with it a penalty of up to a year in jail and a $100,000 fine. May not sound like a huge penalty, but both misdemeanor charges, but nonetheless significant because they are one of the first times in recent history when the U.S. Department of Justice has prosecuted someone based upon a referral from in this case, House committee, could also be a Senate committee, another entity of the United States Congress, for failing to abide by the simple subpoenas that it's issued. And as we have talked before many times in this show, Mike, Dom, others, and the Saturday show, certainly during the course of the week, we have talked about what that means. When you are issued a subpoena in America, what that means is at a minimum, you need to show up. That includes if you're a witness for a proceeding, you need to show up for that court proceeding, that administrative proceeding. If you are being summoned in to serve as a prospective juror, at a minimum, you need to respond in some way. You can perhaps contact the clerk of court, but you need to show up. And that is the baseline issue. That's the baseline obligation that anyone who is issued a subpoena has to comply with. Steve Bannon didn't do that. He said instead, I'm not showing up. I'm not going to cooperate. And again, based upon that history, the attorneys, the prosecutors of the United States Department of Justice returned this 2-count indictment, charging him with these misdemeanor violations. And Steve Bannon has, of course, since that time, maintained he is innocent. And during the course of the last 6-8 months or so, while this has been pending, he has said that his consistent defense has been the former president, President Donald Trump, provided him with a shield to his obligation to come and appear and testify before the J6 committee. He said, I am shielded by executive privilege, which the former president can exert, can assert. And for that reason, because of that, my conversations with him during this time when I was serving in this sort of ex officio, but nonetheless senior advisory capacity with the president, they're shielded from discovery, shielded from disclosure to the January 6th committee. For that reason, I am not showing up. And that's my defense, principally, maybe some other things around the edges, but principally that has been his defense. The trial of those 2 counts is scheduled to begin and will begin in just a few days, actually about 6 days, on Monday, July 18th. Yes, that's next Monday. A federal district court judge in the District of Columbia is bringing that lawsuit finally, that criminal prosecution, to fruition, if you will, picking a jury, picking the process to go forward on those misdemeanor counts. Steve Bannon up to now has said that he's going to turn that criminal case against him, these words, not mine, into the misdemeanor for hell, his words, for the Justice Department. All of that changed. All that changed just a couple of days ago when a couple of things happened. One is the former president said, presumably in contact with Steve Bannon's attorneys, said, you know what? I'm going to release him from this executive privilege shield. I'm going to tell him, go ahead and testify, no harm done. And of course, Steve Bannon's lawyers then wrote to the panel, told members of the panel that their client would now be pleased and delighted to appear before the panel to talk about things. Zoe Lofgren, a Democrat from California, said we got the letter around midnight a couple of days ago from his lawyer saying that he would testify, and we want to have him testify. So the committee, of course, has not yet had a chance to discuss it, but I expect we'll be hearing from him, and there are many questions we have for him. The question, of course, that you may pose, you may think about right now is, well, that change in position, that change in posture, does it impact the trial? And the answer, as we know from the judge just about 24 hours or so ago, is no, it does not. It does not change the posture of that trial. The judge has said in what's called a pre-trial conference with the attorneys for the prosecution, the attorneys for the defense, the judge has come out and said, you know what? We're going ahead with this trial. The fact that you have decided now, basically, to drop this executive privilege shield, which, as an important aside, never really shielded him at all. Again, as we know, the executive privilege runs to the present executive, the present president, not a former president. Also, almost certainly not protected by discussions that maybe Steve Bannon had the presence of other people. Certainly not protected because they may have been chatting about the very things that the January 6th committee is talking about. That is criminal conduct. Criminal conduct is not shielded by any privilege, any privilege. You're talking to someone about committing a crime, that doesn't hold. And so the judge a couple of days ago said, you know what? All of those defenses, I'm not going to instruct the jury on them. You can raise what you will, but I'm going to stop you from alleging those kinds of things during the course of the trial, which is starting on Monday, by the way, the judge says. And I'm not buying any of this belated notion that now you're going to run to Congress and testify before Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney and other members of the committee. Not buying that at all. The jury's still going to be selected. The trial's still going ahead on those 2 counts. All of that because it's a nice lead-in to our principal discussion today. Again, Steve Bannon, maybe this is the sideshow to what happened today, but an important issue, an important development, an event in American history when Steve Bannon, again, just this past week, is told by the judge, number one, he cannot raise these privilege defenses, probably going to be shut down in a major way, prompting his attorney publicly to say, gosh, I don't have much to work with here. Maybe I will, in fact, have to reconsider what we're doing here. And here's the first prediction before we begin to head into the first break of the day and before we begin our major discussion this afternoon of the January 6th committee proceedings. What's going to happen on Monday? Well, we know that Steve Bannon's not going to be testifying before Monday before the committee. Liz Cheney has indicated that there may not be another hearing this week, but at some point down the road, and certainly there will be some interest in having him, whether it's before the committee, publicly or privately, interested in his commentary. But the reality is he's not going to do that before Monday. The trial's going to go ahead. Does that make any difference that he comes forward and says, you know what, I would like to testify now before the Zoe Lofgrens of the world and the Benny Thompsons? And the answer is no, as a pure legal matter. This is not the case. We can get around it because you've already committed the crime, if you will, right, of failing to appear, which gets us back to our very, very first comments. The crime is the failure to appear, and that's what Steve Bannon's going to be tried for in the federal district court on Monday of the coming week. Join us at 844-967-2789. We're going to be talking this afternoon about the January 6th committee, the events of just this afternoon.
There's a special place in hell for Republicans who should know better.
He's running first, second, third. He stopped between third and home. What the heck?
Ooh, that's not the time to stop. And now's not the time to stop wearing a mask. Vaccines are a game changer, but the game's not over. Mask up until you're vaccinated. Let's finish strong. For more information, please visit cdc.gov/mask. A message by CDC and the Ad Council.
President Trump lost the election. Joe Biden won the election.
Collectively, Republicans got 1.661 million votes. 61,000 more votes than Trump got.
He exhausted his cases. He exhausted the court challenges.
All the Republicans voted for Trump the way they voted for the Assembly candidacy.
It was not rigged. It was not stolen. Donald Trump lost the election. Joe Biden won the election. It's really clear.
This message was paid for by the People for People Corporation. Donate online at p4ppc.org.
The Devil's Advocates, because freedom.
But Tom, we've been following a couple of big stories this week. Truck convoy leader has no idea where he is and is driving in circles around I-495. He didn't know precisely where he was going anyways or where he was at the time. Apparently, he put the convoy back on the road, headed back up north, and he's back in Scranton. So
I totally would have protested this tyranny, but damn, the traffic was so bad.
Follow the Devil's Advocates on Facebook and Twitter.
Tom has been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. I was really starting to worry.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
60% of the time, they're right every time. The Devil's Advocates.
And good afternoon. We're back. This is the Devil's Advocates radio show. Good afternoon, Wisconsin. Good afternoon, America. My name is Jim Santelle. As I said before the break, I'm standing in for Mike Kruth this afternoon, who is out doing the business of this radio station to keep it on the air, keep it alive, keep it active, keep it engaged with you on important issues of our time. I'm delighted to be here, joined in the studio as my producer is Evan. And we're taking your calls this afternoon at 844-967-2789. That number once again, 844-967-2789. I promised at the start of the show, at the top of the hour, we're spending most of our time this afternoon, virtually all of our time, talking about what happened for the previous couple of hours in the House J6 committee, reviewing once again the events of January 6th, the things leading up to it, the events of that day. We heard a lot about that today. And then also the events that followed it, providing context for all Americans to understand what happened on that day that changed forever America. We know that in advance of today's hearing, one of the principal presenters, one of the principal committee members who is responsible for offering up some of the testimony today, her name is Stephanie Murphy. She is a representative from the state of Florida. And she told us in advance of the hearing today what we could expect. She said, we will lay out the body of evidence that we have that talks about how the presidents, and she's talking there about President Donald Trump, tweet in the wee hours of December 19th, we'll get back to that also, of "be there, be wild." That's in quotes because that's what the tweet said, was a siren call, Representative Murphy said, to these folks coming to Washington, D.C. She referred to this tweet that specifically said, big protest in D.C. on January 6th. The president wrote, "Be there, will be wild," as I just said. And Stephanie Murphy, the representative member of the J6 committee from Florida, went on to say, we're going to connect the dots during these hearings between these groups. She's talking specifically about groups like the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers and others, between these groups and those who are trying in government circles to overturn the election. This is Stephanie Murphy telling us in advance what the agenda was for today. I think you have to reach your own conclusions, she went on to say, but based on the events leading up to the day, January 6th, I think that would be a logical conclusion. There are, in fact, these ties between those officials, those people who we expected more of in terms of supporting and continuing the government of our nation, and those people who were just designing and planning and did, in fact, attempt to overthrow our government, like the Oath Keepers and a fellow named Stuart Rhodes and the Proud Boys and a fellow named Enrique Torrio, both of whom, and their companions have been indicted by the United States Department of Justice for seditious conspiracy, using force to overthrow the government. So the connections between those groups and others, and people in positions of responsibility, of authority at the White House and other places in Washington, D.C. before, during, and after January 6th. That was going to be the focus of the J6 committee hearings today. And in fact, it was. Let's begin with some of the review of that included not only Stephanie Murphy's presentation, but also hearing once again from Jamie Raskin. Jamie Raskin, who's a U.S. representative from Maryland. We may remember him well. Jamie Raskin was one of the principal presenters for the impeachment proceedings that happened in the wake of January 6th. He was the House presenter, the House litigator, if you will. Also a major player in today's presentation. It started, however, with some very compelling words from the chairman of the committee, Benny Thompson. You know what he said? He said, we settle our differences at the ballot box. He started at the very start of the committee hearing today. He said, there are many times when we're on the losing sides of things, and we may protest, we may organize, we may plan for the next election. But the thing we don't do, Benny Thompson said, is we don't turn violent. We don't use force and harassment and intimidate people. Plainly, a direction headed in Donald Trump's sight, if you will, alleging that he did all of that and responded inappropriately, inconsistent with history. Benny Thompson saying, we settle our differences at the ballot box. We don't do what the president and other people encourage people to do on, before, and frankly, after January 6th as well. And so he talked about this last-ditch effort that the president had to try to maintain his power, try to maintain his position in the White House, that plainly failed. Nonetheless, he summoned a mob, and that was the principal focus of today's hearing, the connection between what the president and others did to get that mob here and to bring them to Washington, D.C., to attempt to overthrow the government, and certainly to attempt to stop the counting of electoral votes on that day. He was followed by the vice chair of the committee, Liz Cheney. Liz Cheney, representative from Wyoming, as you well know, who talked again, always drops these very interesting tidbits, if you will. And she did again today, both before and at the very end of the hearing. There was one at the very end that we'll also get to, anticipating the next hearing as well. But at the very start, she said, for a long period of time, as we looked at this period from about December 14th, which is a seminal date today, and January 6th, everyone was talking, it was close to Trump, about how the election had not been stolen. And there was this notion that our defense to our involvement was going to be that we said those kinds of things. Now, she said at the very outset that instead we're hearing recently that the president was misled. It was persuaded by others, blaming people like John Eastman, who was the author of this memorandum, this design to overthrow the process. Sidney Powell, whose name we'll also hear a lot about this afternoon as well, that he was persuaded, perhaps even duped by these other people. And she gave us this insight into where the committee is going today in understanding all the things we're hearing, this change, if you will, in defense from the election not being stolen or being stolen, depending upon which side of the fence you're on. But now that the president's defense is going to be, I may have been misled by others. That's what Liz Cheney said at the start of the hearing. And we're going to chat more about the substance of that. She's going to talk, as she did, we're going to talk more about what the vice chair, or the people the vice chair called the crazies, and the blame she placed upon them as we come back here on the Devil's Advocates radio show, 844-967-2789.
Yes, we're done. Let's eat. Come, eat good food.
Here we are, the young contender, scrappy, controversial, has an impressive reach. Devil Radio 92.7.
Tom Nelson.
Thomas Nelson is probably the hardest working person in politics.
You got to put him at the top when it comes to experience. He was a Bernie Sanders delegate, yet he's representing a county that actually went for Trump in the last election.
And by the way, he saved a paper plant. That's a really positive thing to be able to use.
To me, he seems like the kind of guy that might have the best shot in the general election.
I'm Tom Nelson, running for the U.S. Senate, and I approve this message.
Devil Radio has been kicking ass, earning every listener, and providing our sponsors return on investment 3 years now on the Madison airwaves. And there has never been a better time than right now to advertise with us and join the Devil Radio community. Our audience is loyal and growing every day. Active listeners that don't flip. Wonder if your ad dollars are working? Devil Radio listeners will tell you it works. Ad production is included. Devil Radio will make it easy for you to start seeing return on your investment. Call
For Devil Radio 92.7 FM and WTTN 1580 AM, I'm Luke Mathers with your headlines. Devil Radio 92.7 FM will be broadcasting live gavel-to-gavel coverage today, beginning at noon, of the U.S. House Select Committee on January 6th public hearing. New analysis from UpNorthNews.com shows the Butch Lewis Emergency Pension Plan Relief Act that was passed by Democrats in Congress last year and signed by President Joe Biden secured and saved the pensions of millions of Americans, including 22,500 Wisconsin pension recipients. Democratic U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin worked to ensure pension relief for Wisconsin workers was included in the American Rescue Plan last year, ensuring more than 20,000 Wisconsinites could rely on their pensions today. Every Republican member of Wisconsin's congressional delegation voted against the bill. Forecast of sunny skies today with winds from 10 to 15 miles an hour and a high today of 83 degrees. Mostly clear skies expected this evening with an overnight low of 62 degrees. You're listening to Devil Radio. The Devil's Advocates, the fix for political junkies everywhere.
And this is Jim Santelle once again today in the Devil's Advocates radio show. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm here in the studio, and Evan is here too, acting as my producer today. We're talking for the remainder of our time together today all about the J6 committee, the results of that 2.5-hour proceeding, going through some of the significant issues that came up, some significant testimony, especially from a couple of witnesses. Their names, Jason Tatenhoff and Stephen Ayers, at the very end of the presentation. Before we even get to that, however, a very compelling story told by the committee managers, specifically Representative Jamie Raskin from Maryland, Stephanie Murphy from Florida, telling the story about what happened on December 18th. Again, filling in some of the information, what was going on post-election, but before the inauguration, plainly, in January of 2021, but also before the January 6th insurrection. What did they tell us? Well, they said on December 18th, there was what could only be described, according to everybody who was there, all of the representatives who were discussing this, who were describing the events of that day, an unhinged meeting, their word, not mine, an unhinged meeting on December 18th. At the time of that meeting, late in the evening, we have entering into the White House 3 people. Michael Flynn, who we know well from previous engagements with not only the Justice Department, previously convicted, had his conviction overturned for lying to the FBI. Sidney Powell, also this attorney well known to America, perhaps not in an especially good way for advancing in all these pieces of litigation around the country, this notion that the election had been stolen. Also a fine named Patrick Byrne, who is from Overstock, probably the unknown character here. They somehow make it into the White House late in the evening of December 18th, after the election, before January 6th, and they're having this meeting with the President of the United States of America alone in the Oval Office. And
during the sound of that interaction with Mr. Cipollone,
it sounded like Pat Cipollone was not especially pleased, right, Evan, to hear about this. One of the representatives said apparently he comes running when he discovers that suddenly the president with these 3, again, none of them White House staffers, none of them certainly checked, screened by White House authorities. They're somehow permitted in. How that happens, for those of us who've been there, suspect many of you had, very, very difficult to get in, absent an awful lot of hurdles to hurdle. They get in and they're having this conversation about what they can do to keep Donald Trump in the presidency. As Evan just said, White House counsel Pat Cipollone, he comes in, he storms in and says, "What's going on here?" Looks at one of them, looks at Patrick Byrne and says, "Who are you? I don't even know who you are." And says, "What's going on here?" And according to all the witnesses this afternoon, all the testimony, both on tape and then through the hearsay testimony, the recounting of especially Representatives Murphy and Raskin, there is screaming that's going on. The screaming continues for a long period of time. This meeting apparently migrates into the Roosevelt Room right across the way, migrates eventually into the residence, which is down the portico, up into the main building of the White House. When you think about the White House itself, out of the West Wing, and the conversation heated and profane, almost reaching the point of a physical fight among people. Ended up in the residence, as I said, and it's all about what we can do. What can be done to keep the president in office? That is the advocacy plainly by Michael Flynn, Sidney Powell, perhaps this Patrick Grimm fellow as well. And of course, Pat Cipollone, who's always said, continues to say, as he told the committee last week, there's no there. There's no basis upon which to keep him in office. The election was not stolen, and stop it. Apparently name calling is going on December 18th as this just over the top raucous event takes place. During the course of it, apparently Sidney Powell, as she has said before, talks about the engagement of Venezuela and Iran and even China. Insults are thrown back and forth. At some point, Pat Cipollone says, how can it be that 60 judges have all found that there's no there, that this election was not in fact thrown? And Sidney Powell apparently says, well, they're all corrupt. Every single one of them is corrupt. We need to talk to the president. And the president plainly, implicitly and explicitly encourages this because he is listening finally to people who are telling him what he wants to hear. Not what he should hear, but what he wants to hear. He's telling them, they are telling him, selling to him a package of goods that plainly is premised upon facts that are not real. Screaming in and out of the West Wing, in and out of the residence. Nuts is how it's described. Along the way, it also becomes clear that even in advance of this meeting on the evening of December 18th, there's an executive order that's put together by some folks who met at the Trump International Hotel a couple days earlier. And the concept behind this executive order, a draft, thankfully never sees the light of day, never sees a light coming through some authors, probably like Sidney Powell, Michael Flynn, others, that the Department of Defense should seize voting machines and appoint Sidney Powell, who is there in the West Wing and the Oval Office, some sort of special counsel to monitor all of this. Again, Pat Cipollone in his own testimony, as we heard today, shaking his head, scratching his head. That's probably understating it wildly, indicating that there's no there. This is all craziness. The executive order, of course, is not issued, but it further underscores what the intent was at that time to try to convince the president to go ahead and continue to push to retain power, to overturn the results of the election of the previous month in December. And we get this absolutely meltdown situation, one of the most dramatic probably in all of American history on December 18th. Eventually, Pat Cipollone is so outraged by all of this that he actually escorts Michael Flynn out of the West Wing, out of the White House, off into the grounds, presumably right there on Pennsylvania Avenue and 16th and 17th Streets. He says to make certain that Michael Flynn doesn't somehow make his way back into the residence. And this, once again, Pat Cipollone indicating all of this, recounting this to confirm all of this on December 18th. A very important thing that the committee talked about today, presented an awful lot of evidence, not just from Pat Cipollone and others, but confirming that this event in which the president is still hanging on to this notion of retaining the presidency in mid-December, December 18th, December 19th. And then perhaps the most important thing that comes out of that is the president plainly stewing. This meeting then has taken place. Presumably the shouting has stopped, the screaming has stopped, the nutso has stopped. And at 1:42 in the morning, we know the former president did lots of things in the early morning hours. He sends this tweet that Representative Murphy talked about in advance of the hearing today. He says to all of those who would support him, be there, a meeting on January 6th will be wild. Be there, will be wild. That is the invitation that he makes at 1:42 a.m. on December 19th. And that's what initiates everything that happened then afterwards, bringing us up to January 6th, the insurrection, the riot, the loss of life, the injury not only to individuals, that is the most horrific consequence of that day, but also the injury to our nation and the attempt to overthrow the legitimate decisions made by Americans in voting for one president, one candidate, and not for another. I'm going to talk more about that this afternoon, but we're always taking your phone calls. Delighted to have you call in at 844-967-2789. And Evan's got lined up Kurt. Kurt, you're calling in. Be delighted to have you contribute to our conversation this afternoon.
Yes, James, good afternoon. I'd like to make a comment and ask you a question.
Absolutely. Go right ahead.
I've been watching every last minute of all the proceedings, and I've also, news commentators. That my blood literally curdles when I hear someone make the statement about how smart Trump is and how he was able to manipulate so many people. I couldn't disagree more. He is clearly dumb as a box of rocks. And this is a man who has made others wealthy because they used him as a willing pawn. And if anything, he's a benchmark to two things. One, how badly broken our justice system, because this guy should have been in jail before he hit the age of 50. And two, it also shows what happens to a large number of people in the United States who lack all skills of critical thinking or are already fascist, and it just brought them out of the shadows. So my question to you is this. After today, and especially with the closing, with the next hearing saying that they have audio of Trump interfering with a witness, if the proceedings were not to move forward from this point on, not hearing anything more, in your opinion, do they have enough to put him away?
Kurt, let me unpack some of those very, very good thoughts. Thanks so much for calling in. Really appreciated that. And I could not agree more that many of the things that we have been challenged with throughout since 2015, arguably before that, right, when the former president first declared his candidacy for the White House. This is a man who fundamentally doesn't understand how government works, right? And he reveals that during the course of his tweets, his comments, both official and unofficial, the things that he says on the record, off the record, and he does not have not only those critical thinking skills, Kurt, that you just described, but he fundamentally doesn't understand how it is that the Congress works, how the executive branch works, what judges do. And my suspicion, like that of many others, it was implicit, if you will, in what a lot of what Liz Cheney said today and in previous proceedings, is that this is a man who came to the White House anticipating that he'd be able to operate the government, be the chief executive, one branch among three, which he may or may not appreciate fully, operate it in the same way that he ran the Trump organization itself. And that is, I simply tell somebody to do something. I simply tell Evan that I want you to do this, and he will do it. Because he is my employee.
That's right.
He's not your Evan. You're not my employee. You're my colleague and my friend, and glad to have you with me. But that the notion still holds in government, as in here, as in most businesses. The notion that you can simply tell people what's certainly true in civics, in government generally, you just don't do that. And here, I think we have a situation where Donald Trump found himself consistently stupefied. Maybe Kurt, he is a product of a failed education, and may not be as dumb as a box of rocks, as you so appropriately described it. But he also ran for the presidency, and we should expect more, right? And I think, Kurt, you'd agree with that as well. It certainly is a benchmark that we have not yet, in all of the fraud that he has committed, seen him in a court where he is really held criminally responsible for the things he's done civilly in many ways. And we certainly hope that the U.S. Department of Justice, which we know now is looking at many of these same kinds of things, will in fact pursue this. And so let me offer a couple of more insights into the very good questions, Kurt, that you raised about what happens next. We know that for all of this presentation, including the things that we heard about today, some of them for the first time, this December 18th meltdown discussion that was going on, we know that the committee itself cannot prosecute it. I started this afternoon by talking about Steve Bannon. The committee does not have the capacity to prosecute anybody. They're not litigants. They're not the Department of Justice. They can refer things or not. But the Department of Justice on its own can, and I would offer should be, investigating many of these kinds of things. Every indication now in the wake of everything from Peter Navarro indicating that he got a subpoena. We know from Lisa Monaco, they are definitely looking at this false electors situation. The Attorney General himself, Merrick Garland, has said on at least 2, if not 3 occasions, we're going to pursue this as far as it needs to go. Very, very strong indications. We've had some search warrants issued, right? Jeffrey Clark and others out there, and John Eastman. We know search warrants come out of the Department of Justice. We know that they're looking at it. We don't know the scope. We don't know the focus yet, nor should we. All these things are grand jury proceedings and should not be in the public domain. But we know that the Department of Justice is looking at this, and we do need to spend some time waiting for that result. But we also know the reason for the committee's work today is to let the American public know what happened. That is a huge, huge responsibility and duty. They're doing a fantastic job from my perspective. We're going to talk more about that right after the break here on the Devil's Advocates radio show. Again, taking your phone calls at 844-967-2789.
Well, if you say who gets fired, it always has to be the top. I mean, problems start from the top and they have to get solved from the top. And the president's the leader and he's got to get everybody in a room and he's got to lead. And he doesn't do that. He doesn't like doing that. That's not his strength.
19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
Feeling increasingly lonely right now? You're not alone. Try joining a virtual book club or scheduling an online coffee break with coworkers to connect.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
The possibility of lung cancer can be pretty scary, especially if you're one of approximately 8 million current or former smokers at high risk. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know that now there's a breakthrough low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early, and it only takes 60 seconds. You stop smoking, now start screening. For an easy quiz to see if you're eligible, visit SaveByTheScan.org. It could save your life. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
Warning, listening to the Devil's Advocates may expose you to opposing views.
We've mentioned, inflation is going to be an issue. Let me ask you this. What would you like to see Donald Trump do if you were here? What did you suggest Biden do to address the inflationary pressures we're facing right now?
Well, I can't tell you that because that would be something you could counter and defeat Trump with, or the Republican Party. So tell you.
You think Trump's taking strategy from you on talk radio, Lou? I mean, you're no Kid Rock, Lou.
Follow the Devil's Advocates on Facebook and Twitter.
Hi there, I'm Kirk Bankstad and I own the Monaco Brewing Company. I also have a super PAC. We make good trouble in the North Woods of Wisconsin. You can support our efforts at the MonacoBrewingCompany.com and buy our woke gear like t-shirts, hoodies, and trucker hats. Enter the code RADIO and get 10% off on your next purchase. A portion of all sales support the Monaco Brewing Company Super PAC, which is dark money meant for good. That's the MonacoBrewingCompany.com.
Stories come to life at your local parks and forests. They're places of wonder, and they're closer than you think. Make the forest part of your story today at a local park near you, or find one at discovertheforest.org. Brought to you by the United States Forest Service and the Ad Council.
Save the $2 on tomorrow's paper. Listen to the Devil's Advocates today.
And we are in the last segment of the Devil's Advocates for this hour on this wonderful Tuesday afternoon. Thanks so much for listening in. My name is Jim Santelle, sitting in this afternoon for Mike and Dom. I'm here with Evan. We're talking this afternoon about the J6 committee, this very significant hearing that just took place a number of hours ago, also broadcast right here on this radio station for you to listen to consume, and to talk about. Right before the break, we're chatting in particular about this calamitous event that happened on December 18th before January 6th in the White House late at night, screaming, yelling. A young man named Derek Lyons talking about screaming was completely out there. He said this was completely nuts throughout the night. And as did Cassidy Hutchinson last week, this stellar witness describing a lot of the events right before, during, and after January 6th. She also described it as an unhinged meeting. And it was in the wake of that, as we were saying before the break, that the president sent this invitation to America, if you will, at least a certain portion of America, inviting them to Washington, D.C., saying, be there on January 6th, will be wild. One of the organizers described that as sort of an invitation to the Red Wedding, a reference, I think this is the reference, right, Evan, to the Game of Thrones and this very calamitous, horrific, bloody event, right?
Yeah, and it's a sinister, kind of creepy reference. I mean, people, like, lots of people died.
Lots of people died. And again, the fact that one of the people who was on the receiving end of that tweet viewed this in retrospect, even at the time, as kind of an invitation to that kind of calamitous thing. It underscores the seriousness. This is not just someone who is tweeting some mindless thing. He is the president of the United States of America, sending this invitation, again, principally to people like the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers. We recall well that during the course of the campaign, during one of those debates, he looked at them and said, stand back and stand by. Stand back and stand by. We didn't know
I saw that live.
Did you see that live, Evan? Right?
It shook me to the core. I mean, what he was refusing to do in that moment, it was very, very stark.
Given the opportunity, Evan, as you just said, to say, you know what, I'm going to distance myself because I am a candidate, continuing candidate for the presidency of the United States of America, and I'm going to reject everything that these insurrectionist groups, these white supremacist military groups like the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers, I'm going to put them to one side. I'm going to dismiss them. I'm going to reject everything that they're about, and instead says, no, stand back and stand by, and repeats that effectively.
They even gave him the words. They said, would you please ask them to stand down? Right. They made it easy for him.
Made it easy, gave him the words that she may not have understood, but he understood enough that was the message. And he understood certainly when he says, be there, will be wild. He understands very much what that invitation was all about. And in fact, it was wild. People lost their lives on January 6th. Huge numbers of people injured at that time. And we did come very close, as this committee is showing us on a regular basis, to losing our democracy on that day. And we are still challenged by all of these kinds of things, these challenges to our republic. And this continuing notion here in Wisconsin and around the country that the election was a fraud, that it was stolen. And that's what animates much of what the committee was talking about this afternoon. We're going to talk more about that in our remaining moments in this segment. We're also going to take your calls. And Mark, you're on the line. You've been waiting for a while. Thanks so much for calling in. Your question or your comment, Mark, for our conversation about the J6 committee.
A couple of comments first. The Hamilton 85, he closes out, by Federalist Papers, I know powerful individuals in this and other states are enemies to a general national government in every possible state. And a 75 warning about avaricious people, that using the state for their own purposes, their own position for their own purposes, enrich themselves. And for these congressmen that I saw, 11 of them went to a meeting to talk about overthrowing the election. That the warning to all these people that they took an oath to the Constitution. The Constitution as it exists today, not the Constitution that they think it should be, or the Constitution they dream up of writing if they want to have a new constitutional convention. The Constitution as it exists today. For those members of the Proud Boys and Oath Keepers that were members of the military, that they took an oath to the Constitution of the United States, as I believe most of, I think, lawyers take as well, to uphold the Constitution, to obey it, to uphold the law. And how these people, that the rule of law requires them to be held accountable, each and every one of them.
Absolutely.
To the fullest extent of the law. I mean, the committee needs to refer this to the Department of Justice. And the Department of Justice needs to say, no, we're not going to overlook this. We're not going to give you a slap on the wrist. You're going to get slapped silly and go to jail if necessary, or drummed out of Congress if necessary.
And Mark, your invocation of Hamilton's 85, that's exactly it, right? A lot of people quoted from that, this notion that avaricious people, and certainly seemingly describing Donald Trump not having the best interests of the nation at heart, very much relevant. The specific meeting you're talking about, as we've learned again today in sort of the second portion of the J6 hearings today, a December 21st meeting in which this so-called Eastman theory, the Eastman theory was presented from John Eastman. He wrote this memorandum describing this multi-purpose way of overcoming the results of the November election that involved the vice president, involved these electors.
Do you remember the photographs?
Yes.
That came out that day, right? So, the MyPillow guy, Eastman, being pictured outside the Oval Office, right?
Absolutely.
And you got to write in big letters,
right?
For president, former President Trump, you need to write big,
right?
And literally from a football field away, reporters took pictures and you could read this stuff.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
It is amazing, and once again, it underscores the lack of sophistication, but more importantly, I think to Mark's good point here, the evil intent here. There is a powerful There is a sinister intent here that was meant to overthrow the government. And the fact, as Mark was just indicating, that we had representatives, again, invited to the White House to hear these members of Congress, to hear Eastman talk about the ways in which indeed there is a theory. There's a theory upon which you can overthrow this election. Pat Cipollone, again, once seemingly, if not a hero in American history, certainly now disclosing once again his attempts to push back on this consistently, telling this group the vice president does not have that authority. That is not the case. He doesn't do anything much more than a ministerial act on January 6th. Pat Cipollone in all these situations, all these meetings, private and quasi-public with members of the Congress, consistently saying, no, 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 you cannot do this. You need to drop this crazy theory, this nutso theory, as some members of the committee have indicated. Witnesses have likewise described this inside the White House, the same kind of thing. Pat Cipollone is the one who's there, presumably, and we know with others as well, telling the president that there is, in fact, no basis upon which to pursue all of this. We're going to continue with this discussion this afternoon in our second hour, inviting, as always, your calls here to the Devil's Advocates radio show. I'm Jim Santelle, joined in the studio by Evan. We're taking your phone calls at 844-967-2789, talking about today's proceedings before the J6 committee. Join us after the break. Offer your observations as we continue to talk about America today and in the future.
Get a great effing criminal defense lawyer. You're going to need it.
Hi, this is Brad from Zero Res. If you need someone to help with your carpet cleaning, business or residence, please give us a call. We have the best system available and an amazing team of friendly technicians. Call us at 848-9000 or schedule online at zeroresmadison.com.
The real estate market in Dane County and surrounding areas has been a bit of a hot mess this year. Listings are being picked off above asking prices and without the home inspection contingencies. I'm Todd Osborne, owner of Orion Inspections, and even if I weren't a home inspector, I'd still cringe a little if any of my friends or family tried to buy a home without an inspection. Let's take a good hard look at that house before you sign. Want to know more? I'm here to help. OrionInspections.com. That's Orion, like the constellation, inspections.com.
Listen to the Empowered Caregiver Show each Saturday and Sunday morning at 9 a.m. with hosts Liza Hellenbrand and Kristen Voss.
Right here on Devil Radio 92.7, WTTN 1580 AM, and the Devil Radio app.
You are listening to WTTN 1580 AM Columbus, W224 EG Madison, always streaming on the Devil Radio app.
It could be. It might be. It is. Devil Radio 92.7.
This is Pat Slattery of Slattery's Automotive Service in Verona. Established in 1973, I've been servicing and repairing cars in the Madison community for nearly 50 years. You can trust me to tell you what your car really needs and fix it right the first time. Give me a call at 608-848-6123 to schedule an appointment today. Slattery's Automotive Service, your trusted choice for local service and repairs for all your automotive needs.
Brian, what the heck are you doing?
I'm making a patio.
When I told you it was patio season, I didn't mean we had to make one of our own.
But I got all this grout all over me now.
Yeah, but I meant we need to go see Hawk at the all-new Jade Monkey on Cottage Grove Road. They've got an awesome patio, and it's the perfect place to stop for a cocktail after the show.
Jade Monkey has a patio. Why don't we go there?
Exactly. Now put down those power tools and let's go grab a drink.
It's all right. I was done anyway. Suck down drinks so we don't have to suck.
This is Chad Spate. In 1992, I moved to Madison to pursue a PhD at UW, and I started a residential remodeling company called Chad's Carpentry. I was eager to make a difference, to change the world, and I soon realized that our remodeling company was a great place to start. We pride ourselves on understanding how houses work so that your home improvement project actually improves your home, and we love what we do. To learn more, go to chadsdesignbuild.com. And thank you, Madison, for 30 great years.
Stay informed with progressive news and talk on WTTN 1580 AM, Wisconsin's home for Devil Radio.
For Devil Radio 92.7 FM and WTTN 1580 AM, I'm Luke Mathers with your headlines. Devil Radio 92.7 FM will be broadcasting live gavel-to-gavel coverage today, beginning at noon of the U.S. House Select Committee on January 6th public hearing. U.S. Senator Ron Johnson's office is facing an ethics complaint that was filed on Monday, inquiring about $280,000 in cash gifts the senator and his wife paid to his former chief of staff when they worked together. The U.S. Senate has ethics rules surrounding how much congressional aides can be compensated, and that cash gifts are not acceptable. The ethics complaint seeks to determine if Senator Johnson's office used the cash gifts to circumvent compensation limits set by the U.S. Senate ethics rules. According to the American Fitness Index rankings, Madison, Wisconsin is the nation's second fittest city based on indicators of personal health, community health, and environmental health, only behind Arlington, Virginia. You're listening to Devil Radio 92.7 FM to TTN 1580 AM.
Devil Radio programming is produced live in the Solidarity Realty Studios. Find them at solidarityrealty.com. Solidarity Realty. There is an alternative.
Warning, you are about to listen to the greatest radio show ever. And due to contractual obligations and to shield our airwaves and corporate licensees from any semblance of liability, responsibility, and gullibility, we must tell you the views represented on this show are not necessarily those of this station or its management. This radio show contains differing points of view on current political topics, and due to the nature of its contents, it should be heard by everyone. Thank you for listening. Now live from the Devil Radio Studios in Madison, Wisconsin, where the political party is just beginning. Welcome to the Devil's Advocate Show. Friends proving it's never personal, only politics.
Please allow me to introduce myself.
Here is your host, Mike Cruz.
Good afternoon. This is the Devil's Advocates Radio Show. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We are talking for the remainder of the Devil's Advocates Radio Show today all about the J6 committee. Its hearing of earlier today, broadcast live on this very station, chatting about the significant things coming out of that hearing, the revelations about this quite spectacular December 18th late night unhinged meeting, nutso as one witness described it, in an attempt by the president, or more directly his supporters in the names of Sidney Powell and Michael Flynn, to try to keep him in office, and the fight that ensued between them and members of the White House staff, including Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, to try to bring this to an end, to stop this. But it happened over the course of several hours and resulted early in the morning of December 19th in the president's tweet inviting everyone, Americans, and in particular, a certain subset of Americans, the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, others who would believe in the lie that he was telling about the election being stolen, inviting them all to come to Washington, D.C. to try to overturn the legitimate results of that election. During the course of the introductory period of today's hearing on Capitol Hill by the J6 committee, Liz Cheney from Wyoming, the vice chair, said, you know what? All that we're seeing falls into sort of three rings. Discussed a lot of this before. Mike Pence being one of those rings, an attempt to convince Mike Pence, contrary to the law, contrary to what Pat Cipollone and everyone knows, that he does not have the capacity to declare the election fraudulent and send the elective ballots back to the states. That was one ring. She talked about the second ring, much in focus today, of these extremist groups led by Stuart Rhodes, the Oath Keepers, Enrique Tarrio, and others of the Proud Boys to coordinate this event on Capitol Hill, to undertake to overthrow what was going on there and stop the counting of ballots. And then third, Liz Cheney also said, focusing on January 6th and the things that the president said on the ellipse that day to encourage this large and increasingly angry crowd, thousands of people, enraging the rally, as she said, exciting them up, prompting them to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue, walk down the street and approach and then breach the Capitol and attempt to stop the proceedings from going forward. She mentioned, as did others, as did two of the principal presenters today, Stephanie Murphy from Florida and Jamie Raskin from Maryland, both parts of the committee. Both of them also talked about the fact that there was a noose placed on the Capitol grounds, presumably intended for the Vice President of the United States of America, Jamie Raskin, at the end of the hearing today, talking about American carnage, not only on that day, but taking up the words that the president himself had said during the course of his inaugural statement, his inaugural address to America, describing this dystopian America that, in fact, as Jamie Raskin described this afternoon, he himself has now created this American carnage, again, invoked by Jamie Raskin on January 6th in an attempt to undermine the legitimate election that happened in November of the previous year. We're taking your calls also about what happened today, the other significant findings. We'll chat more about those, including the creation of the president's speech that he delivered on January 6th at the ellipse, the significant events that also reveal his intent, his purpose, his power, if you will, his assumption of power in trying to command this unruly crowd, trying to bring them to the point of furor and to do exactly what they did. And then we're also going to chat a bit about these two witnesses who testified, Jason Tatenhoff and Stephen Ayers. One of them deceived for a long time by the Oath Keepers, but seeing the light of day and describing the fraudulent nature of what they do. The other one, Stephen Ayers, at the very end, describing how he himself, his life, the life that he had created with his wife, was also there, destroyed by accepting this invitation of the president to come to Washington, D.C., believing that the president was honest and true, when in fact, as Mr. Ayers testified this afternoon, now recognizing that this was all false, asked by, I believe it was Stephanie Murphy, asked by Jamie Raskin, if you knew then what you know now about what the president's knowledge was, that it was everybody telling him there was no there, the election had not been stolen. Mr. President, this effort is inappropriate, it is illegal, it is not in the best interest of the nation. Would you come? And Stephen Ayers said no. I lost my job, I lost my house. I felt like I needed to be there. Why? Because my president told me I needed to be there. Stunning testimony at the end of the day about the impact of what the president did in inviting the Jamie Ayerses of the world and also the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and many others to Washington, D.C. Hundreds of people now indicted by, charged, many of them sentenced already for their involvement in that, many more to come. We're taking your phone calls. And in fact, we do have a phone call. Lou, you're on the line with us. Your comment or question as we talk about the J6 committee this afternoon.
I found out that Hunter Biden's laptop says that $35 million was given to Biden by the Chinese, and I think they're going to impeach Merrick Garland when Republicans take over the House because he failed to prosecute those people who appeared in front of the Supreme Court Justice Holmes, that's a federal law, and chooses to disobey or not to pay any attention to it. Where do you get off doing that?
Well, and Lou, you should know that obviously for example, the young man, remember this story, the young man who showed up in front of Justice Kavanaugh's home and had the wherewithal in the not to go ahead. He was plainly armed, plainly incited to do something terrible, right? Probably to attack the justice's home, his family, perhaps the justice himself. Law enforcement did respond to that, and that young man has been charged. And so the Department of Justice does respond to those kinds of things, but appreciate the call and appreciate your calling in about that particular event. We will look forward to Merrick Garland. I want to make another comment about this, as sort of collateral to what the caller just indicated, and that is that, once again, the J6 committee, significant in terms of telling America what happened, hugely important to our understanding about what happened for government reasons, certainly for political purposes, for our historical understanding of what our nation was about and continues to be about. We're heading into another election later this year. Again, yet another one in the following year here in the state of Wisconsin, and certainly 2024. Important for us to know as we make these all-important decisions about who should be representing us in the White House, in the Congress, frankly, in our state house, in the governor's mansion, in our state assembly, in our state senate. All those things important for us to know. And they also go to this question of whether or not there should, in fact, be legislation enacted by the Congress to ensure that this never happens again. You may recall well that during the course of the Watergate hearings, 1973 and so forth, Sam Ervin and Howard Baker and a bipartisan committee advanced a huge package of legislation to ensure that the offenses of Richard Nixon, including things like an enemies list, that those would no longer happen. Violations of the tax laws. I'm going to chat at the end of this hour about one of those apparently by the Trump administration. Huge numbers of things done by the committee at that time in the early 1970s to stop this from ever happening again. That also a part of the January 6th committee. What needs to happen from this? And we can anticipate that their report, when it comes out, presumably in September of this year, maybe before, maybe a little bit after, will also advocate not only for changes in the way we think about America, but specific legislative actions that can be taken to ensure that the offenses and the violations of law that happened under this prior administration don't happen again. So that's also part of their function. Department of Justice does not need a referral from this committee to pursue any of these cases in terms of both the people who were there on the ground on January 6th, or, as Merrick Garland has said, the higher-ups who might be responsible for the conduct and organization that the committee was talking about today. Department of Justice has the independent authority to pursue that. They plainly are. We've got another caller who's been on hold for a while. We'll take that caller right now. Your comment, your question about our discussion this afternoon.
Who's this, me?
Yes, that's you. We're glad to have you with us. Go right ahead.
This is CJ from Stoughton. Glad to talk to you.
Yes,
James.
CJ?
Well, it took January 6th for the Democrats to actually care about crime and violence. And Attorney General Merrick Garland doesn't believe he has the case. There's no smoking gun. There's no directive from Donald Trump. Why don't you play the part in his speech where he said, go down to the Capitol peacefully? You and January 6th committee never play that part. And he listened to Cipollone. He didn't pursue exactly what he wanted to do. So the mere fact that Cipollone is actually testifying you didn't hear Cipollone said, look at what Donald Trump did. He didn't say, you know what, Cipollone, I'm doing it regardless of what you say. So this is going to be another 2.5 year, $25 million plot, just like Adam Pencilneck Schiff did with the Russian collusion.
And Adam, I appreciate so much your comment. We appreciate all views on this good radio program. Appreciate perspectives in all senses of the word. It's important, I think, to understand that the Department of Justice does have a responsibility to do things in a nonpartisan way. I was part of the Department of Justice for 30 years. And I can tell you, both as a U.S. attorney, both as an interim U.S. attorney and the presidentially appointed U.S. attorney, that issues related to politics, to what partisan politics might otherwise suggest one would do, never, ever, ever came up. And they shouldn't be a part of the process. I have said before on this very radio show that the decisions to prosecute people for political reasons, for reasons that are not reflective of the facts in the law, those are no less, no more corrupt than a decision not to prosecute for the same reason. And while I take your point very well, and certainly there's a lot to digest here when it comes to Pat Cipollone and others here, we also have to understand that our Department of Justice, whatever the decision is made by Merrick Garland, has got to be premised upon the facts, got to be premised upon the law, and got to be premised upon what are called the principles of federal prosecution, which take into account a wide variety of things related to deterrence and punishment and the future. A lot of criminal prosecution, as you know, is intended for the future, to ensure that future presidents, future potential criminal defendants do not in fact engage in the same kind of conduct out there. So we appreciate that comment. And we're going to be talking more about the January 6th committee right after the coming break. Here on the Devil's Advocates radio show, I'm joined in the studio by Evan, always taking your phone calls at 844-967-2789.
Foundation.
Devil's Advocates, making radio great.
And we're back. This is Jim Santelle standing in for Mike Crute, who is away doing the business of the station today. I'm here in the studio with my producer, Evan, and we're taking your calls, your questions, your observations at 844-967-2789. The subject matter of our syllabus, our curriculum this afternoon, is the J6 committee, having just spent about 2.5 hours on Capitol Hill, revealing more about what happened before, during, and after January 6th. And right before the break, we were talking about a few more of those small tidbits and large items that were disclosed today. Among the things that might get lost in the fray, some of the news reporting on this, were some of the internal discussions going on again in early January, right before January 6th. And we heard today about a woman named Christina Pearson, who was also on the president's staff at the time, who, when she heard more about these groups, the Oath Keepers led by Stuart Rhodes and Proud Boys led by Enrique Tarrio, began to monitor more and more some of the things that she was seeing in the public domain, online, other places, became increasingly concerned also about people named Ali Alexander and Alex Jones, very well known to sort of the insurrectionist groups and counterculture groups out there. And she went to Mark Meadows, the chief of staff, about whom we've also heard an awful lot, went to Mark Meadows and said, you know what, Mark, things might get out of control here. We need to rein this in. That was in January 2nd, early in January, about the same time that there were also some of these other conversations being had in the White House, again, long after December 18th, this tumultuous discussion, this fight, this anger, this meltdown discussion that was had late at night, early in the morning, early January, lots of discussions among people, again, in the White House. We know from some previous testimony of this committee that among those conversations was one in which John Eastman, the sort of the architect of much of this design, involving both the vice president, involving false electors, involving people coming to Washington, D.C., involving changing the votes in 6 or 7 different states, that Eastman himself was in the Oval Office talking with the president, acknowledging that the very thing that he was articulating in his memorandum would probably lose dramatically before the Supreme Court, 0 to 9, he said, recognizing and says in the presence of the president, there's no there. There's nothing to my memorandum, but we're still going to go out there and advocate for it. And sure enough, the president does, during the course of this same period, tell America, as he did in his tweet, many other appearances, both at the White House and beyond the White House, that the election has been stolen, and come to Washington, D.C. on January 6th for the very purpose of vindicating the horror, the thing that happened in early November, when in fact nothing horrific happened that day, aside from the normal, the procedural, the appropriate election of a president, as we have done for well over 200 years in this country. Katrina Pearson, sounding the alarm once again to Mark Meadows about what she is seeing. Mark Meadows, as we know, also concerned at the time, even though publicly, since that time has not condemned the president in a way that plainly internally he may have done at the time. We know CJ called before, and he was talking about the speech, the preparation for the speech the president gave on the ellipse right across from the White House that morning. A huge amount of testimony this morning about, and this afternoon in particular, about how that speech came to be, and the president writing it well into the evening of January 5th, and specifically inserting and then removing lines about the vice president. Among the inserted and then removed lines, we'll see if Mike Pence will do his proper, appropriate job. And it turns out that, again, as a result of some intervention, probably by Pat Cipollone and others, that language is removed from the draft. And then the language, as it finally is presented to the ellipse, the crowd in the ellipse, includes that language once again. And the Pence line is reinserted. The president speaks about fighting and some ad libs to his speech. He says you have to be strong, you have to fight like hell. Significantly, that's put in context today by the committee. And when does that happen? That happens after he has a conversation that very morning with the vice president, kind of a last conversation, if you will, between the president and the vice president, the president plainly calling upon Mike Pence. Mike, will you do this thing for me, for the country? Will you find that these votes are not properly presented to you? Will you turn this back to the states? And Mike Pence, as we know from previous testimonies, saying, nope, I will not do that. He turns back on this. Pat Cipollone today in that recorded testimony confirms once again that Mike Pence takes this high road and refuses to do what the president is encouraging him to do. The president then turns around, goes out to the ellipse, reinserts that language, encouraging, if you will, subtly or perhaps not so subtly, the continuing anger against Mike Pence as the one person who could overturn the election, who plainly may not do that. We know that Mike Pence did not do that, returned to the well of the House to read those votes after the insurrection is underway, even while the dust is still settling, and does in fact certify the Electoral College votes and opens the door then, if you will, to the proper entry into the White House of Joe Biden on January 20th of this year. We know a lot about that. We also know that Brad Pascal, from today's testimony, a former campaign manager, also has a lot of conversation with this Katrina Pearson, and they go back and forth and talk about, the efforts that could have been made to try to stop the president from saying those things on January 6th that revealed his intent, revealed his purpose to incite this riot. In the end, Katrina Pearson attempting, if you will, if you will, to sort of put her arm around Brad and say, we did our best. We tried as best we could. Brad Pascal in the end saying, in the end, it was the rhetoric. It was the rhetoric. It was the language that the president used that prompted this to happen. A bit more about what happened today in front of the January 6th committee when we return here in the Devil's Advocates radio show, taking your phone calls at 844-967-2789.
It's a line and a voice of reason. I'll be the one to protect you from your enemies and your choices. I'm one and the same. I must isolate you, isolate and save you from yourself.
From Wanakee to McFarland, 92.7 FM is essential radio to get you through the pandemic.
Dark Horse Art Bar is Madison's newest live music venue and art gallery on East Washington Avenue. Check out these upcoming events at the Dark Horse. Get your 10 seconds of fame at the Open Mic with Pinhead McFly. Open Mic is the second Tuesday of the month at 6 p.m. Open Mic with Pinhead McFly at the Dark Horse. Dark Horse Art Bar and Gallery, 756 East Washington Avenue. Find them online at darkhorsemadison.com.
The destination.
If you think you need home inspection, you probably do. Hi, I'm Todd Osborne of Orion Inspections. And buyers, sellers, and even flippers, I'm talking to you. Knowledge is power when it comes to real estate transactions. You'll get an image-packed, searchable, digital, printable report of the condition of the house, things to keep an eye on, any safety issues or defects, and the knowledge to make smart, informed decisions. Your instinct is telling you to get an inspection, and instincts are usually right. Learn more or schedule today at orioninspections.com.
From Up North News, I'm Pat Kreitlow. These first two stories are different stories, even though they sound the same. Story number one, a Republican candidate for governor said Tuesday the legislature should come back into session and pass a bill to throw out everyone's 2020 ballots using an incorrect interpretation of last week's court ruling about drop boxes. Story number two, a different Republican candidate for governor said Tuesday he wouldn't rule out signing a bill to throw out everyone's 2020 ballots, saying he'd have to see the details. Here's the detail. It'd be illegal and based in nothing since there was no widespread voter fraud. And to break up the monotony of those two stories, we offer up the happy news that the goats are back in Wausau, helping gobble up buckthorn and other invasive species in a city park. You can get that and more in our daily newsletter. Sign up at upnorthnewswi.com.
The Devil's Advocates, never personal, only politics.
And we're back for our final half an hour of this beautiful Tuesday afternoon here in the Devil's Advocates radio show. My name is Jim Santelle. Evan is my producer this afternoon. We are taking your phone calls at 844-967-2789. We're chatting all day today about the J6 committee, the results of its 2.5 hour presentation today. It comes in the wake of another story that hit out of the Washington Post and some other media late last week that also puts in context everything that we chatted about earlier, this ellipse presentation, this ellipse speech that the president gave, what happened at the Capitol moments after that. Washington Post reporting that there were, among the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys, huge numbers of weapons present with them at that time. We know well that the President Trump at that time, specifically asked that the people attending the ellipse assembly there, the rally there, not be subjected to reviews and searches because he knew that they had weapons. He was told they had weapons. Additional reporting these days that there were staged weapons beyond just the ellipse in the suburbs around Washington, D.C. There's military ordnance. There were grenades in the area. A huge amount of potentially even more horrific violence could have happened. Undeniably, a group, including the Proud Boys, including the Oath Keepers, heavily armed. We know that about 120 people or so have already been charged with weapons violations in connection with January 6th. Again, puts in context the seriousness of what was intended, including that of the President of the United States of America. And the J6 committee, again, beginning to draw what Jamie Raskin and Stephanie Murphy, the principal presenters today. Jamie Raskin, congressman from Maryland, Stephanie Murphy, a congressman from Florida, described as this convergence of efforts that brought together the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and many others on January 6th on the ellipse at the Capitol itself for the riot there. And all the work not in a positive way, designed to get that group, that crowd, that mob there in the first place. A lot of focus, again, upon this meeting of December 18th that resulted in the president inviting groups of people to come to Washington, D.C. on January 6th, encouraging them, as he would ultimately say, to fight like hell, presumably on his behalf. We know at the end of the proceedings today, we also heard from two witnesses who testified about their specific involvement. One of them with the Oath Keepers and Stewart Rhodes, Jason Tatenhove, who was for a while one of the principal media folks, was allied with Stewart Rhodes. Stewart Rhodes, as Tatenhove indicated this afternoon, was a resident in his basement for a while. Tatenhove today recognizing this affiliation, this longstanding affiliation with Stewart Rhodes and the Oath Keepers was not only unwise, but plainly very dangerous, and ultimately said, I've got to distance myself from this group. Today, what did he say? He said, they are a militia. They're a very dangerous organization, and talked about the fact that this was an attempt to put together an armed revolution. This is from somebody, again, used to be affiliated with the Oath Keepers. He talked about the fact that there was this gallows set up on the Capitol Hill itself, presumably for the vice president or some other people there who had run afoul of the interests of the Oath Keepers and others there. And significantly said, what I saw there that day, this is coming from Jason Tatenhove, could have been the spark to another civil war. That is his testimony today in front of the J6 committee. And then, as I said in the prior segment, this singular individual, Jason Ayers, there with his wife, probably being a representative person of so many who were there the day, who talked about being duped, misled, deceived into coming to Washington, D.C. by a president who he trusted. When the president said to him, you know what, the election has been stolen, it has been taken away, Jason Ayers believed his president and believed what he was reading on social media, believed what he was seeing on Facebook, and said, I needed to be there because my president told me to be there. described it as the worst mistake of his life, losing his job, his home, plainly having an impact upon his family. How many other Stephen Ayers are out there in the context of people who came to Washington, D.C., lives now forever affected, if not ruined, as we know as well. People died there that day. People dramatically impacted physically as well, psychologically, emotionally. The impact of what happened that day cannot be overstated. Dick, you're also on the phone this afternoon. We welcome your comments or your questions.
Well, to that last story, too bad, so sad. I hate to be so callous, but here I look at stuff being totally different than most people. For instance, this whole January 6th thing, what was going on in the same timeline they always bring up? COVID. And you know how they like to say, oh, the former president was responsible for warp speed? No, he wasn't. But we'll get by that. And even if he was, what kind of a leader or a president would have done what he was doing to just stay in power when thousands of people were still dying of COVID? And we all know now that when he left office, only about 3 or 4% of people were vaccinated, when in fact the vaccination was out there late in his presidency. I guess my question to you is, you know, guys, you people that are such sycophants and that can't get over the fact that he lost, he still had a job to do. And his job became nothing more than self-preservation and to stay in freaking office, as opposed to doing what you should do as a president.
No, Dick, I couldn't agree more. We talked earlier today about the notion that you take an oath in office, right? You take an oath in office to support the Constitution, to execute the laws, a duty of care to the American people. That's what your point is all about. Everything we heard about today and previous times, it's all about staying in power. It's not about serving the people of the United States of America. You know, Dick, when you speak about COVID-19 and what the president knew here, I think there are also some parallels here. Your point is very well taken. We know because of Bob Woodward's book, the very same time that this former president was telling us that this was not that big a deal, that we're don't need to be all that focused upon this, and plainly minimizing the significance of a virus that took the lives of more than 1 million people in the end. And 300 people continue to die to this day from this virus. We know from Bob Woodward, at the same time that this president was saying those things publicly, minimizing the impact of this, telling people that they can, in fact, do things that they should not do, further spread the virus. We know that the president understood just the opposite, right? Because he told Bob Woodward that. We know that from the tapes. He tells Bob Woodward, you know, Bob, this is a serious thing. It's a big deal. People are going to die, and turns around and says just the opposite to the American population. I would offer, Dick, following up on your very good comment here, that we have the same thing here. We've got a president who plainly knows. He has been told by everybody from his counsel to his own children, to people surrounding him, to everyone but the Rudy Giuliani's and the Mike Flynn's and the Sidney Powell's of the world, that he did not in fact win this election. He knows that. He understands that. He is not a stupid human being. He is a deceptive. And what does he do? He goes out and he tells America that in fact the election was in fact stolen. And that I would offer to you is the ultimate in violation of your oath to work on behalf of the people of America, the people who put you in that office in the first place. It does not go to a criminal exposure, but it certainly, again, puts all of this in historical perspective. When our grandchildren think about this presidency, all of these kinds of things, COVID-19, Dick, as you say, the circumstances under which a lot of this happened, all of them have to be read together in terms of an administration that was not at the top, focused on what's best for America. We've got another caller, Gary, calling in. We're delighted to have you with us. Gary, okay, we're going to take Gary perhaps later on in the course of the program, but appreciate again all of your phone calls as they come in here on a regular basis. We're heading into the last portions of our discussion today about the J6 committee. We know at the very end of the committee, in addition to this testimony from Jason Tatenhoff and Stephen Ayers, that there was this very personal testimony about the impact of what happened on January 6th on them. This armed revolution, as Tatenhoff described it, this potential spark to a new civil war. Plainly, those things presented by this committee almost as victim impact statements. I think about many of these things in the context of what a trial would look like. The Stephen Ayers of the world, who, again, if you did not see him this afternoon, pick up that testimony and watch as he sits there in front of his own wife. And they plainly are not just somber, they're devastated by the fact that they were misled by a president of the United States of America to do something that compromised their lives. That's the impact of this in the individual way on families in America. That's the impact upon hundreds of people indicted, charged, many of them sentenced already, and many of them still under investigation, under prosecution. That is the impact of what he did, what this former president did to Americans. And as I've said before, his impact upon our psyche generally, further perpetuating this notion that there was in fact a steal. We see that to this day in the state of Wisconsin. The news we just heard about continuing candidates advocating for election reform when in fact there is nothing about the past, nothing about the present that suggests that we have got an elective process, we've got a polling process where massive fraud happens on a regular basis. 60 or more judges found exactly that sort of thing, the same kinds of things that happened out there across the country, findings by judges basically repelling, rejecting the notion that the big lie is real, rejecting the very thing that Donald Trump was in fact advocating for and continues to advocate for to this very day. And so as we begin to move to the end of our time together, I wanted to focus on a couple of things. One of them, again, Liz Cheney, always bringing to a conclusion here with a little nugget of something that's very, very interesting, plainly discussing what's going to happen next. We had heard initially that the committee was going to have a prime time presentation this coming Thursday. They have decided not to do that, so you can watch something else on Thursday evening. But at some point down the road, there will be an 8th hearing and maybe more hearings, and again, anticipating a report from this committee at some point in the late summer, early fall. But at the end of today's hearing, Liz Cheney, as she always does, gives us a little bit of a nugget of something to think about. We were called from the Cassidy Hutchinson testimony of last week that she described the context that she had from people, presumably on behalf of the president, saying, you know what, we anticipate you're doing the right thing. We know that people will be listening to you. And she regarded that appropriately as intimidation, witness tampering. In a broader sense, that's obstruction of justice. Today, Liz Cheney, the vice chair of this committee, returned to that in the very last minutes of the committee hearing. Some of you need to watch for it at the very, very end. Not a lot of exposition here, but Liz Cheney once again saying, you know what, we've got other evidence of witness tampering with respect to witnesses coming before this very committee. And it's nice to talk about witness tampering and say, well, gosh, you know, you're threatening them, you're doing those kinds of things, and that's horrific. There's a larger understanding of that. That is a crime. That is a crime. You can't do that. And just like you need to show up for a testimonial appearance when you're subpoenaed to do so, likewise, you cannot intimidate witnesses. You can't suggest to them that bad things will happen or that people are watching you. And we are tantalized by the fact that Liz Cheney said at the end of the hearing today that there is more evidence that the committee has that witnesses who are appearing before this very committee are being tampered with, and that the very process of justice, which is the exposition of the truth before this committee, presumably also being pursued by the Department of Justice, that all those kinds of things might be affected by those people out there who don't want the truth to come forward, who are doing this witness tampering, who are engaging in obstruction of justice. That is a violation of the law, is a violation of Section 7217 of Title 26 of the United States Code. I know, Evan, you know that well. It prohibits,
yes.
You have that at your fingertips, right?
Yeah.
Prohibits anybody from the executive branch or anyone in a position of responsibility from influencing or in any way affecting the testimony they may give. Obstruction of justice, those kinds of things cannot be had under our federal criminal code. We'll talk about more about that. And a final story that brings us out of the Devil's Advocates radio show this afternoon. Come back after the break. We're talking more about the J6 committee and related events in the United States of America.
But if I'm right, and we can stop this thing.
Being a father is an honor, a challenge, a duty, a celebration, and a testimony. I want to be legendary for you because I found everything to live for.
That's dedication. Visit fatherhood.gov to hear more. Brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
Taking them on their first real roller coaster.
Okay, buddy, come on over.
I don't know.
Let's measure.
Okay.
You're
Just tall enough.
getting back to the moments we miss starts with getting informed. Get the latest info about COVID-19 vaccines at getvaccineanswers.org. It's up to you. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
The Devil's Advocates, the fix for political junkies everywhere.
There seemingly is a willingness amongst Republicans to subvert future elections. How troubling is that to you, man?
Yeah, I think it's more than troubling. It's the core issue in the upcoming elections in 22 and 24, and it's going to be seen that way by historians. These people are out to destroy the democracy. To me, that is the linchpin issue in the upcoming election.
To what end, Matt?
Do we destroy our democracy or not?
Follow the Devil's Advocates on Facebook and Twitter.
Hi, folks. This is Kirk Bankstad at the Monaco Brewing Company, and I am proud to introduce you to Choice, our new pink grapefruit flavored hard seltzer. Choice was made in collaboration with Planned Parenthood of Wisconsin, and 5% of the proceeds from every can goes to support them and their fight for reproductive freedom. Choice hard seltzer tastes great and comes in at only 105 calories per can. Go to our website, monacobrewingcompany.com, to find where you can buy Choice hard seltzer.
My Shiro always goes the extra mile, stretches every dollar, puts others first. But now it's your time, Mom. Get free tips to help boost your retirement savings now at aceretirement.org.
Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
Kicking ass and taking names since the Wisconsin Uprising. The Devil's Advocates.
This is the Devil's Advocates radio show. Good afternoon. Glad to have you with us in our final moments this afternoon. Before we begin to head out and perhaps take at least one more caller in our final moments or so, wanted to highlight another story, not directly related to January 6th, but certainly affiliated with and associated with the kind of conduct that Liz Cheney was chatting about at the end of the presentation today. That is witness tampering or getting after people because you don't like what they're doing. This story came out last week from the New York Times, other places. I'll remember Jim Comey, who is the former FBI director, used to be a U.S. attorney, used to be the deputy attorney general of the United States of America. And his deputy
used to be quite respected.
He used to be quite respected, absolutely, right? Also notorious, if you will, for a very significant press conference that he had in which he presumably exonerated Hillary Clinton in the midst of the 2016 election from any criminal violations, but opened up all kinds of doors and did something that I think a lot of us to this day regard as highly inappropriate for an FBI official to do. This particular story devolves not from that, but from the fact that obviously Jim Comey ran afoul of Donald Trump as well. Jim Comey fired very notoriously by Donald Trump, as he said to Lester Holt for that Russia thing. And Jim Comey, it was replaced then by Andrew McCabe at the FBI, who then turns around and reestablishes, reinstates, if you will, the very investigation that Donald Trump hoped to stop. That is the investigation into whether or not there was a Russian involvement in the 2016 election, ultimately gives rise to the so-called Mueller report and the findings of their report. But long before that, Donald Trump fires Jim Comey. Eventually, Andrew McCabe is also fired on the eve of when he could have had his tenure basically in stone and got some long-term benefits as a retiree. That ultimately is restored to him. But a lot of misbehavior directed toward Jim Comey, toward John McCabe. And this is the story that comes out very recently. It turns out that these two are also the subject of what's called a National Research Program tax review. It is a very, very invasive tax analysis that can, in fact, lawfully be pursued and is pursued by the U.S. Department of the Treasury, the Internal Revenue Service, significantly. The odds of being selected for this kind of very invasive audit in any given year are really minuscule. About a one out of nearly about 153 million individual returns, for example, the IRS finds about 5,000, or that's about 1 out of every 30,000 or so of these. So the chances of your being investigated, being audited under this very invasive process are very, very limited. And turns out that both Jim Comey and Andrew McCabe were, within a couple of years of each other, the subjects of these audits in 2017, 2019. And of course, again, it raises an awful lot of concerns about whether or not they were targeted internal to the Internal Revenue Service. And again, an awful lot of laws out there that prohibit exactly that kind of thing. We don't know. We don't know exactly what happened, but there's an awful lot of people, both in government, outside of government, scratching their heads and saying, gosh, is the connection between Jim Comey and Andrew McCabe, the fact that they ran afoul of Donald Trump, the fact that they are subsequently pursued by the Internal Revenue Service for what it's worth. Turns out that Jim Comey overpaid his taxes by about $350. Andrew McCabe, both he and his wife have to make a few additional payments, which they do. And as a result of that, an awful lot of people out there wondering if, in fact, there is a connection, a use of the IRS by the former president and his administration to get after those we regarded as his political enemies. Again, shades of Richard Nixon, we talked about in the first hour. And as a matter of fact, there's so much concern about this that indeed the present IRS commissioner appointed by the former president, Donald Trump, has asked that the Inspector General of the Internal Revenue Service come in and take a look at this, figure out whether or not there was somewhere in the bowels, in the structure of the Internal Revenue Service, someone who made the decision to go after these two people, high-profile people. Could have happened. Statistically, probably very unlikely, but could have happened. And the Inspector General is right now, has opened an investigation, again, with the encouragement, with the support of Charles Rettig, again, the commissioner of the IRS, to find out what's happened. And again, we don't know what the result of that is. It is statistically possible that they were randomly selected. On the other hand, highly unlikely. And we hope that the Internal Revenue Service, not used by the former administration, not used by the IRS generally, to go after the president's political enemies. But I raise that again, just because of this continuing specter out there of going after people who have things to say, things to do, as they operate in government, as they perform their legitimate purposes, including testimony in trials, in administrative proceedings, and in proceedings before houses of Congress, including the House of Representatives, the United States Senate. We know the president had a long, long history of sending out tweets, sending out information, sending out comments about witnesses, both dangling the possibility of pardons, that is the carrot, and also threatening them implicitly and explicitly if they do not, in fact, testify in a way, behave in a way that he himself would endorse. And so we'll see what happens with the Comey-McCabe investigation, but underway now to determine whether or not anything untoward happened there inside the Internal Revenue Service. And as we go into our last few moments, we do have another caller from Beaver Dam, Andy, calling in. Glad to have you call, Andy, your comment or your question.
Well, yeah, Jim, I think with anything, you have to put everything in historical context. And somebody today during the hearing made a comment about it, the Watergate being a Cub Scout deal compared to what this is. And I think anybody that would read about Trump and know the way he operated prior to seeking public office was a guy that you could not, would do anything to get what he wanted. And as a result, he probably, or for sure, would have been a bad choice as a nominee for president. And it's proven that way. I hate to say that he's part of my generation, but, all the people out there that are still drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak, about the election, it's all fallacy.
It is fallacy, right, Andy? And we won't ascribe any personal responsibility to you, whether or not the former president is a part of your generation or not. We won't tag you with that responsibility. Lots of people have done wonderful things in your generation as well. Handy, your point about history is an important one, right? We need to be thoughtful about what our history has been. We also need to be thoughtful about the future. Plainly, we think about today in the context of Watergate. I just made a reference to Richard Nixon. And I think it was Jamie Raskin who made that connection as well that you've highlighted today. Appreciate very much your comment, your thought, Andy. Call in again, as should other callers down the road. This has been Jim Santelle, standing in today for Mike and for others here, joined by Evan, who's been my producer today. Thank you so much, Evan, for being with us. Thank you, all your listeners, all those who called in. This has been the Devil's Advocates Radio Show. Join us again. Be safe, be well, and come back again every afternoon, 4 to 6 for the Devil's Advocates Radio Show.
Politics turn on you.
There's a good chance I may have committed some light treason.
Hi, this is Brad from Zero Res. You need someone to help with your carpet cleaning, business or residence, please give us a call. We have the best system available and an amazing team of friendly technicians.
Is there
Call us at 848-9000 or schedule online at zeroresmadison.com.
Let me see.
This local musical interlude is brought to you by Maxine Radio. Jackie Pierce.
I'm not hearing you well. I'm just hearing the.
Listen to Max Inc. Radio every Saturday and Sunday, 6 p.m. to midnight. Download the podcast at maxincradio.com. We are local music.
Listen to the Empowered Caregiver Show each Saturday and Sunday morning at 9 a.m. with hosts Liza Hellenbrand and Kristen Voss.
Right here on Devil Radio 92.7, WTTN 1580 AM, and the Devil Radio app.
You are listening to WTTN 1580 AM Columbus, W224 EG Madison, always streaming on the Devil Radio app.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. So that's it's right in the oh.
Okay, now I can hear you.
Okay, great. So I got your message. Good. So anything here? Should I just turn off the monitor here, or just
Let me see. No, I think you can leave that on. The screensaver will like turn the backlight off.
into quiet mode here?
Yeah, I sent you a photograph that, yep, perfect. And then I think it's just locking the door. I think that's it.
Can you give me just one minute or so? Let me go and do this. And see
Oh,
if I can,
no, yeah, no worries.
accomplish this very important task.
Okay.